So, thank you for joining us for our alumni webinar series. My name's Lynn Laycock, and I'm a senior lecturer in counselling at York St John University. I'm the programme lead for the postgraduate courses in counselling, which includes our diploma in humanistic counselling, which is a counsellor training course. And I've been at York St John in different capacities for about 20 years now. And I've been asked to host this webinar as part of York St John University Alumni Series, Alumni Journeys, Creativity, Careers and Community. So before I introduce today's speaker, there's just a few housekeeping issues to go through. So we'll be hosting a Q&A at the end of this talk. The questions have been prepared in advance, but if you've got any questions you'd like to ask to the speaker, please email alumni@yorksj.ac.uk and the team will pass on your questions. There's also an audio transcript appearing during the talk for increased accessibility. However, please be aware it may not translate perfectly. So having covered that, I'd like to introduce you now to Ros Denby, who's on the other side of the screen. So Ros Denby studied at the College of Ripon in York St John, graduating in 1986 with a degree in physical education. Pursuing a career in teaching, Ros became a primary head teacher in 2000. And then after her career in education, Ros went on to work in the foster care system as an education officer, eventually becoming an education director and finally a CEO. In 2015, Ros returned to university, attending the University of Cumbria to complete a postgraduate degree in person-centred psychotherapy. In 2019, she launched her own private practice, Heart to Nature, and provided one-to-one women-only counselling. Ros is also an equine facilitated therapist and can offer a therapeutic approach alongside the horses and animals in her care. So I'd now like to pass you over to Ros, and I'll look forward to chatting to her after her talk. So over to you, Ros.
Good morning, Lynn. Yes, it feels like a different world now. But way back in 1982, I can't really say I had any great and ambitious plans for a career. And I would say with what I felt was just the most obvious route for me. And that was sport, which was something I'd always been good at. It seemed logical to pursue this post-18. But the one thing that I knew quite emphatically was that I never wanted to be a teacher. So I searched around and found St John's. And I found the human movement course, whatever that was. I was sure I'd find out soon enough. And when I visited St John's, I just fell in love with the campus and its location and the fact that it was far enough away from home for me to give me space from home, but not so far that I couldn't return quite easily. So I started on the combined honours, BA honours course and chose a second study area as geography. It was the early 80s and there was a boom in the concept of leisure time and what to do with it. And Jane Fonda was doing her stuff in pursuit of the body beautiful. And leisure centres and the idea of recreation time was a relatively up and coming concept. It's hard to believe now, but it was kind of revolutionary at the time. And on this basis, I joined the only thing which seemed obvious and went down the recreational management course. And of course, this meant that my tutor and mentor on this course was none other than the famous Romano Zabaroni, one of the most influential people I've ever come across and someone I've kept in touch with until this day. And I don't even like to think how many years ago that was. I don't think about that too many. He held that role with utter professionalism and rigor and high expectation, and I found something in myself that rose to that expectation of academic achievement and looking at life through the lens of opportunity. It was a relatively new concept for me, that. And he was very inspiring. I was young though, and I don't want to give the impression that suddenly everything dropped into place. It didn't. And this amazing career path was launched, because that isn't really true. I squandered loads of valuable time. having a fantastic time playing hockey for the first team and generally having lots of fun and drinking too much and hanging around and doing not a lot. Much like most of my friends at the time. I loved it. I had a part-time job at the racecourse as well in the information centre as a result of some of the work I'd done as part of the recreational management course. And I loved that too. Eventually, as I was leaving, I was offered a job actually with the racecourse for the PR company through my work experience. Fantastic opportunity, but much to my regret now, I turned it down as I was about to get married and move to Wales. Probably not my finest decision, it turned out. As 3 years later, I was on my way back to Cumbria. And true to form, I had no other ambition at that time than to think, okay, what can I do to live in Cumbria and actually make a living? Anyway, I ended up on the PGCE course in primary education at St Charlotte Mason College in Ambleside. I've always liked my learning centres to be in beautiful locations. My specialism was PE, of course, and in those days it was just as Ofsted was emerging. And the course inspired me, and as it turned out, I did actually enjoy teaching and children, and quite surprised myself that actually I seemed to be okay at it too. Anyway, after a few years of full-time teaching and being in management roles in the school, I returned to Charlotte Mason on a part-time basis, lecturing in the PE department and teaching part-time in a primary school just outside Kendal. At this time, I faced a crossroads and realised that I needed to specialise in one thing or another. I thought if I come out of primary education, I'm never going to get back into it. And I enjoyed the teaching, to be honest, in the school with the children more than I was enjoying the lecturing, and I decided to go for it. And not only that, I decided to go for a head teacher's role in a small school. And to my utter surprise, I got it. I really wasn't expecting that. Anyway, that led me then to a couple of years of doing that. So teaching full-time and head teaching full-time too in a lovely small school just outside Kendal. I was asked to go and take over a school in Carlisle, which had gone over into special measures after its Ofsted judgment. And this seemed like a good idea at the time. And you're probably getting a theme here as to that kind of person that I've always been. I've always kind of gone with the flow of what's happening, the opportunities that are on offer. And so I went on a fixed term contract, as the governors in my small school wouldn't give me permission to go. They didn't want me to do it on a sabbatical. They didn't want me to go at all, but I wanted the challenge. I wanted to go and see what that was all about. And so I just took the leap. I went because it was a new adventure. And at that time, I guess I was starting to believe that actually I did have something to give to each new situation. It was one of the toughest things I've ever done. I don't regret it because it taught me so much, but it was incredibly tough and it took everything I had and then some. I'm not going to go into detail, it's a long story, but the upshot is that I was working against a local authority whose whole intention had always been to close the school down. And after 18 months of my fixed term contract and having learnt more in that time than I'd ever learnt before, I decided that working 70 hours a week was a mug's game and it wasn't for me. So I decided to allow the contract to terminate and went once more into the unknown. The main learning, I guess, in that situation had been much more about, as well as about authority and politics in this period. I'd actually been working with disaffected children from extremely disadvantaged backgrounds in Carlisle and their consequent behaviour. And I love that aspect of the work. I love the relationships it was possible to develop, and that when a child learned to trust just a little bit, the world would start to open up for them. And I knew then that I would seek work which would see me working in this environment more. I found a job with a fostering agency as an education officer, and it was my role to liaise with schools and with the families and with the children, to work out barriers to their education and try to support them all through this. I really enjoyed this work, and as it developed, it became more and more about interacting with other organisations, and that's when I started to move towards residential childcare. Started working alongside my husband, who was the CEO and who was in the same field. I became education director for one of the biggest providers of residential childcare, with the responsibility of overseeing the running of the schools the company ran, and for finding ways to maximise attendance and educational outcomes for the children that we looked after. From this, my husband and I moved to another company with the intention of building this from its portfolio of just 3 homes into something bigger. That was a real challenge. And again, another leap into something that I kind of had an inkling that, you know, we could do something here. And also this was something quite vocational for me also around starting to support specifically children in very difficult circumstances. I had quite a lot of ideas around how we would do that, and this time we agreed that I would become the CEO of the company and we would build this company together, and including holding quite significant shares in the company, which was great. Experience had told me that therapeutic childcare was the way to go, and I was already very interested in the therapeutic needs and child-based trauma of the young people we were caring for. And so at this time, I thought I'd put my money where my mouth was and train to become a psychotherapist, counsellor, so that I could at least lead this company as it grew from the front in the most knowledgeable way I knew how. I started a 2-year part-time postgrad dip and worked harder than I had ever had in my life to make this happen. Running the company and studying was just an enormous pressure. I did intercalate for a year at one point in that period. And after the first year, I mean, I loved the course, I loved the work, but I just couldn't. I just thought, I just can't do this. I knew I wanted to finish it, so I asked for permission to take the year out and go back the next year, which they said yes, that was no problem at all. And so I did that. I completed it. And I revelled in the learning and the experience, and I did love it. However, I'd always known that it was equine facilitated psychotherapy that was the mode of therapy that I was most interested in. I've always loved horses. I've always lived, you know, I have my own horses, and I knew that that was the environment that I wanted to develop and grow in. And as I was in the groove of the education and I was still running the company, I decided to carry on and take the actual qualification in equine supported psychotherapy. But I knew that I didn't want to, there's quite a lot of certified courses, but I knew that I wanted to actually fully qualify. It's always been important to me to have that actual educational basis, I guess, for the integrity of that. And I found a level 5 diploma in this modality, and that was again a year's part-time, and completed that, which was great. And by this point, the company had grown at a rate of knots and had increased its portfolio to 16 homes. I knew that this was around the limit for being able to run the homes in a genuinely therapeutic framework, and the main shareholder wanted to build and grow the company, which was fine, but we both didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be part of that. And so we decided at that time it was time for particularly my husband to retire, and for me to take things more easily. And my plan and my ambition had always been at that point had been to build a private therapy practice, based on a true person-centered approach, but incorporating working with the horses and in nature and the people where I live, which is a beautiful environment, and I had a log cabin, and I was able to offer, you know, a really beautiful environment for people to come along to. I mean, you know, there's a lot more that I guess in the questions and answers, etc., that I could talk about there, but that's basically a potted history of where I am now. I'm actually now fully retired from this work. I've always loved it, but I did make the decision to fully retire just very, very recently, and I'm now working as a pottery assistant in the pottery, local pottery, very close to Penrith. Really enjoying that on a part-time basis. Still have the horses. I live a very quiet way of life. yeah, and that's pretty much me, and pretty much a potted history of where I am now.
Yes, that's a cue for me to come and rejoin you.
Yes.
Yeah. I've been writing little bits of notes down as you were talking. And I could hear this theme coming through of not having a plan
Yeah,
when you started out.
when I started out, yeah.
And that was resonating with me. And I was very interested in the fact that your intention was never to become a teacher,
Yeah.
as was mine. And yet both of us have somehow ended up in education.
Yeah,
I
it
had
just grabs you,
two
doesn't it?
parents who were teachers and swore I was never going to do the same as them. But by a circuitous path, that's how I'm here. But I was just wondering whether there was anything about being at York St John, you think, that helped to develop that frame of mind of going with the flow, or
Absolutely. I guess there was something about the environment at St John's. I think that was I mean, obviously, this is a long time ago. I mean, this is 40 years ago. It hasn't changed so much to be, I mean, that's not true. It's changed massively, but the feel of the campus hasn't changed much. And I just felt when I walked onto the campus, I knew that this was where I wanted to be. I loved at the time that it was, the one thing that stands out in my mind was that the campus was very proud of the fact that it was a self-regulating community. I think that's really interesting, because effectively, being 18, coming away from home, from quite strict parents, and then suddenly sort of coming into this environment, which was effectively, a self-regulating community. So basically, it was a community, it was small, and we all got on well together. The PE department was, there were plenty of us around. There was something about that environment that allowed us to grow and to flourish, to make massive mistakes, which of course we all did. But to really take responsibility for our own lives, to be the way that we felt that we wanted to be, but to have to do that as part of the community. And I think that was probably one of the biggest influences. I think the other massive influence, of course, I've alluded to it in when I was speaking, was Romano Zavaroni, who was is a phenomenal person. He was incredibly just inspirational. I mean, you can speak to anybody who was taught by Romano at that time in that department, and they would probably say exactly the same thing. He's a legend. And it was interesting to me when I was writing this, and I was thinking, well, what was it about him? And again, I guess this theme around taking responsibility for your own learning, your own actions. If you want something, you've got to work hard for it. You've got to really have an idea of what it actually is for a start. And that was a big thing for me, because I hadn't got a clue at first. I knew what I didn't want to do, but then I was wrong in that. So that was a big lesson too. Yes, just that sort of having to knuckle down, having to get on with it. I mean, like I said, don't get me wrong, I wasn't, I certainly didn't work hard enough. I didn't, now I look back, I probably could have done a whole lot more. But hey, it was what it was, and I enjoyed myself, and it was just, I had a lot of fun at the same time.
One of the questions down here was, what do you wish you could say to your younger self when you were at university?
Yeah, work harder. Okay. Yeah. Yes, work harder. I don't know why. What do I mean when I say work harder? Well, I guess what I mean is, apply myself more. But then maybe that would have meant, I wasn't really sure what I was applying myself to.
Yeah.
So I guess, it wasn't ever really going to happen at that point. And now I can look back on it and, with a lot of fondness and a lot of, happy memories, etc. I did what I had to do. you know, I did what I had to do. I came out of it with a 2-2, which was, you know, but I think what I realized as I carried on into education, I went off and did my PGCE, and then I went off and did my PG dip, and then I went, you know, and carried on. I actually realized, you know, you can do this. This is really interesting and really enjoyable, and learning is really enjoyable too. Qualifying, being able to have that background of being able to then go. I think that was the thing about having that. So when I talk about the fact that, yeah, you know, I took big leaps and I thought, right, I don't want to, you know, right, this is the end of this. It goes on to this. But I always knew that I had the background. I always knew that I had the qualifications. I always knew that actually, you know, I'm going to find something. You know, something is out there. I've got the experience. I've got the background to be able to do that. I wasn't just making a big leap into nothing. I always knew that, really, even though I might not be thinking that. I kind of always knew that.
It sounds like something about making the most of opportunities that arise, and then when something opens up, equipping yourself to make the most of it.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was something about as well, the feeling for you of a need to specialise as well.
Well, that's an interesting one. Yeah. When I started teaching, when I started head teaching, and I would, you know, students would come through, and I would work with people. That was one of the things that I realised was, not only is it really good, really beneficial to have something that you're specialising in, having a you know, narrow it down. You know, the broad brush is great at the beginning, but then as you become more experienced, as you become older, as the work changes, being able to just specialize, being able to kind of, you know, narrow off, still keeping everything, you know, holding it all very lightly and looking openly and outward, was well, something. I mean, I can only speak to my experience, and my experience was that was a good thing to do. The other thing that I was absolutely insistent in my own head about, and I don't really know where this came from because it wasn't necessarily anything that anybody had ever said to me, was how important it was to be qualified, how important it was. The education level was important. If you're going to have any integrity at all, if you were going to have any authenticity, if you were going to be able to put your head above the parapet and talk about something, you had to have the background to be able to do that. You know, if you were going to talk to something, make sure you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That was something was very important to me, still is, and it's still important to me from other people too. You know, being open to other people, but only as long as they, you know, I kind of think they know what they're talking about. Yeah.
And I could hear when you were talking about when you were doing your psychotherapy training, and doing that alongside a job, that it was one of the hardest things that you've done.
Yeah, I mean, it was a level 7 course. It was a demanding course. The academic rigor in the course was, you know, and I'd deliberately chosen that I knew that was the level I wanted to go and work in. But, you know, I did pay for it. You know, it was a very tough time. I remember getting to the end of, you know, sort of coming in from the January to the June, and thinking, you know, I probably had about 4, you know, massive essays to write, and just, you know, this is just impossible. But of course, it wasn't impossible. You know, everybody else managed it, and I managed it too. And it's good to look back on. It's good to look back on and think. I mean, I couldn't do it now. I just couldn't. Far too old.
Yeah. It sounds like there's something about the academic rigor.
Yes.
But I'm guessing as well something about the emotional labour in the training as well.
Emotional labour, that's a great way of putting it. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah, huge emotional labour. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And you know, but of course, being completely intrigued by the subject, completely massive. I mean, it was just, and also the beauty of the counselling psychotherapy course, as you will well know, is the amount of work you do on yourself, the amount of understanding you come to the person that you are. I mean, that on its own is an enormous undertaking. and you know, never mind having to. So yes, it was a huge journey, and then being able to sort of, I guess, finish that off with the icing on the cake as far as I was concerned, and going to the LEAP training, the equine supported psychotherapy. That was the icing on the cake. That was the final thing that I thought, right, if I'm gonna do this, let's, as I say, that theme of, you know, let's do it properly. Yeah, that worked out.
And that required setting yourself up in private practice.
It did, yes. Yes, I left. I finished at obviously my full-time work, and then we then moved here. I knew that life was going to be quieter. It was going to be slower. I knew that the environment that I was in, that we were in here, was going to really lend itself to how I wanted to live my life, and also what I could offer to other people. We do live in the middle of nowhere. I knew that I wanted to only offer face-to-face. At the time, it was kind of around the sort of pre-COVID, it was pre-COVID, and then COVID came in. And most of that time, a lot of that time, I was able to carry on with the face-to-face work, actually. Even though lots of sort of counsellors moved to the online work, I knew that the kind of work that I was doing just wouldn't work face-to-face. It didn't work for me personally either. Online didn't work for me, so I just knew that I needed to do that. Yeah, and so setting up the private practice was a really interesting process, because it was suddenly from working. I'd done a lot of work with mind as I was training, and then obviously I was at work, working with the children, and working with other therapists. You know, I was running a therapeutic sector within the company, and we were employing therapists and that work, and it was all very community based, and there was a lot of people that bounced ideas off, and the whole framework that we were running was was based around this kind of person-centered approach to I mean, I'm talking about, you know, the proper Carl Rogers person-centered approach, to working with the children and to living with the children. And you know, to then sort of find myself, right, well, actually, you know, you're in this on your own now. This is you. You know, if you're going to make this work, then it's up to you. Just finding supervisors. A supervisor was well, it wasn't, fortunately, because of the rise of online supervisor, I was able to find a supervisor and do that online. So that was great, because there was nobody to supervise me in the work that I was doing locally, because nobody else was doing it.
Yeah.
And in fact, there are people who, you know, the beauty of it is you kind of branch out into your own way of working. So that was good. So that was okay. I was able to be supported. But then just, you know, building the log, you know, getting the log cabin, getting the horses sorted, just working in that way. It was wonderful work. I really enjoyed it, in many respects. But it you know, you have to be able to kind of keep that work going on your own. There's not a massive. It's a big deal when you live where I do, to find other people who are doing the same thing.
Yeah,
and that I found quite hard work.
So it sounds as if you're saying one of the things that's supportive in being in private practice is having a network of people that you can connect to. Crucial. And particularly if you live in the middle of nowhere.
Yes. Yes, crucial. I mean, you know, there are plenty. I mean, I have plenty of friends. I have plenty of community, but you can't. You know, I couldn't share any of the work I'm doing with any of those people. So it was literally finding that sort of supervisor network, or, you know, that network of other practitioners. And I managed to do that to a certain extent. But that, it was the one thing, it is the thing, I think, that if you are thinking about private practice, it is something to be really aware of, that you do need to have a really, really good support network. I chose to work with women only, and I chose to work with because by that point, by this point in my life, you know, I'm kind of fascinated by. I mean, I'm getting older, and you know, I'm sort of fascinated by the things that women find difficult. And I thought, right, okay, that again, I guess there's something in there about my experience. I was able to draw on an understanding of my own kind of life, I suppose. It doesn't quite work like that, does it, in counselling? But I think just having that basis.
Yeah, and it sounds as if part of that is your experience in working for years with children, families.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always loved working with children. I decided I didn't go down that specialism, actually. I could have, as time has gone on and the bodies are becoming more specialist. They're becoming, it has been still is a self-regulating kind of profession to a certain extent. And then you've got the main bodies. Things are getting tighter and tighter, as quite rightly so. I've never had any problem with that. But making sure that you've got the CPD, making sure that you're up to speed with what's going on. I mean, the children, I always loved working with the young people. It was really rewarding work. I don't know whether I'm proud of this. I don't know whether I like to say this or not really, but it's true, so I better say it. When I went into private practice, I didn't want to work with social care anymore. I didn't want to work with social services. I just thought I've had enough of them. And so I knew that working with young people would involve me doing extra things with social care. And so I just thought I don't want to go there. Yeah. So that was why I then sort of graduated. I thought, well, no, I'm just going to stick with the adults.
It sounds like something of a process of making decisions to move on into different fields, and sometimes that means giving some things up.
Yes, that's right. Yes. It's interesting. There is a lot of work with young people. There is more work with young people, for sure. Yeah. I could have been very busy, but no, I made a conscious decision not to do that. Yeah.
No, and I was interested because I run alongside working here. I do a very small amount of counselling in a voluntary organisation, but for women only. So I was just interested in that desire to focus on that.
Yes. Just something about the connection, something about that connection which just felt right and always did feel right, still feels right. I certainly really I guess again that theme of just going with my gut, going with what I felt was right, going with what I knew. I knew that I know stuff about women, and then that just felt right. Yeah.
I guess one of the things I'm interested in as well is that I think you and I have had similar kind of paths in that we've done other things and then come into counselling later on.
Yeah.
And I'm aware that for a lot of young people, there's much more a focus now of choosing a degree that will set you on a career path.
Yeah.
And then there may be people listening to the webinar who are kind of undergraduates are thinking of moving into counselling now. And I wondered if you had anything to suggest to them about how to go about it.
I think it's a really interesting concept around counselling and young people being counsellors. I don't think there's actually an answer to that. When I was on my course, there were quite a few young people, and there's this kind of narrative in your head thinking, well, but how can you be a counsellor when you're 22 years old and But I actually believe the counselling, psychotherapy, the work is a lifestyle. It's an art form. It's a skill. It's everything. It's who you are and it's how you are. And you're not necessarily bringing your own life experiences into the room. To be able to support and help somebody else. There are ways of being as a counsellor that are perfectly feasible to be 20 odd and do that work. I don't really think, actually, the more that I thought about it, the more I think about it, actually, I think it's perfectly feasible, and you know, there are some very, very good counsellors who are young and are on their path. I think it's a difficult path. You know, it's a path that is under recognised. You know, it's certainly underpaid, and it's certainly you know, it's not a way to get rich quick, for sure. But then, you know, by the very nature of who we are and what we're doing, that's not the reason we're doing it in the first place. So I guess that doesn't really factor in.
Yeah.
I think the other sort of, to go from there, I mean, my background, I mean, you know, I was a PE student. I mean, the last thing I thought I'd end up doing was being a counsellor. You know, that was the last thing I'd end up doing. Never, if I'd been able to look back 40 years ago,
yeah,
30 odd years later, I'd be a counsellor. I just wouldn't, you know, that wouldn't have been a thing. So, you know, you grow, you change, you find yourself, and equally talking about young people, you know, I mean, I was 50, you know, early 50s when I decided to go off to be a counsellor. You know, it is equally something that you could do for the rest of your life if you wanted to.
Yeah. No, I was thinking back to when I was at university, and I can remember going for careers advice and doing one of those aptitude tests, and them suggesting being a teacher or a social worker, which were the two things that or a lawyer, and they were the three things I said categorically, I do not want to do these.
Yeah.
And then found a different path. But yeah, so I think it sounds like there's something for both of us about you make the most of whatever work and employment and life experiences you find.
Yes, just grab the opportunity. Yeah, grab it. I think something about recognizing it when it arrives. And, you know, when I think back to leaving St. John's, you know, and the work at the racecourse, I mean, that was a whole different world. You know, the work at the racecourse and being able to sort of, you know, being offered this amazing job when I look back, you know, and at the time, you know, I guess I kind of knew at the time, but yeah, I chose to ignore it. And it, who knows whether that was the wrong decision? I don't know. You know, as it turns out, life has turned out just fine. So, you know, down a different path.
Yeah. So I guess one of the questions here was, what do you feel is the most helpful information or guidance that you could offer a student at the moment?
I honestly feel that there's something in here about self-belief. And my husband once, well, no, he had quite a few years, he once said to me, and I've never forgotten it. He said, if you think you can, or you think you can't, you're probably right. And at the time I thought, oh, what the hell does that mean? what do you mean? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized was that, you know, it really is absolutely, it's really unequivocal that if you think that actually this is the way forward, and yeah, I've got this, I can do this. If you know that you've got the background, if you know that you've got the integrity, you've got the authenticity, you've got the, the educational or tick boxes that you need to tick to get there, and you know that you're that person, then you know, you probably are. If you think you're not, you know, that there might be some work to do around self-worth and, you know, self-belief. But then again, you might not be the right person, you know, it might not be the path for you. So I think that probably would be the biggest piece of advice that I could give. It's a typical sort of therapist's bit of advice, I think. But it's so true, because ultimately at the end of the day, we are who we are, and we you know, we live our life accordingly.
Yeah. And I think I'm hearing something in there as well through listening to the way your journey has evolved, something about it may not be the right thing for you now.
That's it. Absolutely. Yeah. It may not be the right thing for you now, but, you know, if it's something that it means a lot to you, it'll keep coming back. Stuff keeps coming back, you know, it keeps arriving. That's been my experience. You know, that I suppose the counselling, it's like, you know, the decision to go and do that PG dip was just something that had been rumbling about. It had been in the back of my mind, and then, you know, being able to kind of go into the company, take on the company, and then realise, actually, do you know what, this is the way forward. And it just all seemed to sort of, you know, interact with each other. And again, I thought, well, if I'm going to have any credibility, I've got to know what I'm talking about here. So I need to go off and do something about this. And therefore, that's when you can start to lead something forward, because you know what you're talking about, mostly.
Yeah. And there's something there for you about credibility and integrity that's about doing some qualifications.
Yes, for sure. Absolutely. You know, back to the sort of, you know, working harder, you know, seeing the long picture, seeing the big picture. You know, when things get tough, things do get tough. It's hard. It's really hard. You know, when you've got work that gets sent back to you and it's not good enough, and, you know, you've got to redo it. Really look it up. You know, go for it, redo it. And, you know, it's so tempting, isn't it? Just to, I'll do this. You know, but actually, if it's what you really, really want to do, then I guess you find a way to do it.
Yeah. I think I've probably come to the end of things that I was going to ask you. Is there anything that you feel that I could have asked you that I haven't?
No, actually, I've said everything that, because I did sort of write, you know, the answer to the questions. But yeah, I feel like there's probably a theme emerging. I think the same thing seems to come through, which must be true then. So yeah. Yeah.
And I like that sense of this theme, that well, if it's there, it must be true. It's that kind of things will evolve.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm a great believer in that. If it keeps arriving, keeps coming back, if you can't get rid of it, you know, it keeps there. You've got to listen to it.
Yeah.
But however uncomfortable that is, and it's often very uncomfortable, you know, you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
No, I think, I feel like I've been able to explain myself quite well. Yeah.
So is there anything about being a pottery assistant which is a natural follow-on from this, or is this one of the I'll do something completely different?
Yeah, no, I guess there is, absolutely. I mean, I do some pottery myself. Yes, I mean, obviously there's something in there about the creative side of it. I've never really explored or indulged my creativity, so I guess it's always been there. The obvious therapeutic qualities of working with clay, working in an environment which is very, very similar to the environment in which I live. So you know, I guess I wouldn't just be a pottery assistant if it was in some warehouse in Leeds. You know, it's a beautiful old building in Broome Hall and Penrith, and full of artisan makers, and full of women actually who are very, very similar in their outlook to me. You know, love the outdoors, love animals. You know, so it's that kind of environment. So yes, there is something absolute. There's a definite theme to how I live my life. Yeah, and for sure the pottery assistant thing goes along with that very nicely. Yeah, it's a nice way to end a working career for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
transition into something else. Yeah.
Yes, transition, you know, into a potter. Who knows? Yeah.
Watch this space. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thanks very much for your time this morning, Ros. It's been lovely talking to you. I think that's come to the end of our time together. So it's just for me to say that if anybody has got any questions, if you email alumni@yorksj.ac.uk, and we can pick those up and address anything that comes up. So thank you very much, Ros.
Enjoyed it.